In October 2023, the U.S. introduced more measures to prevent American companies from bypassing government restrictions on the sale of semiconductor products to China in an effort to close the policy loophole. The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, is furious, but there is little it can do. China firmly opposes politicization and weaponization of economic, trade, science, and technology issues. What I want to emphasize is that sanctions and suppression cannot deter the development of China and its enterprises. We urge the U.S. to stop generalizing the concept of national security and stop abusing its national power to suppress Chinese enterprises. In October 2022, Washington imposed its strongest ever chip restrictions on Beijing. At that time, the U.S. Department of Commerce introduced a rule designed to restrict the export of certain high-end chips to China by U.S. individuals and businesses that may be used for military applications or the development of artificial intelligence models. The 2022 rule specifically regulates the export of computer components with a data transfer rate of 600 gigabytes per second or higher. As the regulations took effect, U.S. chip designer NVIDIA quickly released alternative versions for the Chinese market. These include the A800 computer chip, an alternative that offers powerful computing and is below the 600 gigabyte per second data transfer rate threshold. A spokesman for NVIDIA told Reuters in November 2022. The NVIDIA A800 GPU, which went into production in Q3, is another alternative product to the NVIDIA A100 GPU for customers in China. The A800 meets the U.S. government's clear test for reduced export control and cannot be programmed to exceed it. Also, the flagship computing chip, the H800 GPU, can bypass U.S. export controls by removing some of its functionality. NVIDIA's approach has sparked concern from the U.S. government. What are the other loopholes in the chip ban from 2022? In that round of restrictions, the Biden administration allowed overseas subsidiaries of Chinese companies unrestricted access to such chips, meaning they could be easily trafficked into China or accessed remotely by Chinese users. The chips, which are banned by U.S. regulations, can be bought from suppliers in China's Huaqiangbei Electronics District in Shenzhen. Reuters interviewed 10 suppliers from Hong Kong and China in June 2023 and found that small quantities of A100 chips could be easily purchased, often by application developers, startups, researchers, gamers, and even local Chinese government officials. In addition, Chinese companies are buying chips for use in data centers overseas, with Singapore a key hub for cloud computing. Before we continue, I'd like to present our sponsor for this video, Days Coffee Roasters. Nothing beats that first sip of freshly brewed coffee in the morning. But what about the bloating in the afternoon, the frequent trips to the toilet, the energy crash at 3 p.m.? What if you could have delicious coffee without the side effects? Days enzyme fermented coffee is the answer. Days coffee beans are fermented with a 50 enzyme complex that makes the coffee easy to digest. It's gentle enough for people with sensitive stomachs or even acid reflux, so you can say goodbye to harsh coffee and nourish your gut. What's more, Days coffee is also low in caffeine. In fact, it has 85 to 90% less caffeine than regular coffee, which means you can enjoy Days coffee any time of the day without the caffeine jitters or energy crashes. It's the healthier choice for your morning brew. Of course, a great cup of coffee has to taste delicious and smell great. Days enzyme fermented coffee is shipped to you within 7 days of roasting, so you will always get that freshly roasted coffee aroma. Our fermentation process also enhances the flavors in the coffee. With notes of dark chocolate, walnut, and a smooth mouthfeel, Days coffee makes a creamy espresso and an aromatic drip coffee. Bring home your very own bag of Days coffee today. Use code ChinaInsights to get 15% off. Click on the link below the video to learn more. The CCP's AI capabilities hinge on access to U.S. chips. In a June 2022 report, Georgetown University's Center for Security and Emerging Technologies found that of 97 AI chips procured through the CCP military tenders during an 8-month period in 2020, Nearly all were designed by U.S. companies NVIDIA, Xilinx, Intel, and Microsemi. The U.S. government has been trying to close the loophole that allowed AI chips to enter China. It has persuaded the Netherlands and Japan, which have some of the world's top chip-making equipment manufacturers, to join the U.S. and has been working with them to standardize the list of controlled items. Closing loopholes is not only a White House concern, it's virtually a consensus in the U.S. Huawei's recent launch of its Mate 60 Pro mobile phone with a processor claimed to be built on a 7nm process has also raised concerns in the US. The question is widely asked: how did Huawei break through the US chip ban? Bloomberg names 4 companies in Taiwan suspected of helping build infrastructure for Huawei's fabs.
We reported that there were Taiwanese firms that are helping China develop chip factories in China. Is the U.S. investigating possible export control violations there? And more broadly, if you can't answer that, can you gauge concern that our domestic chips program is potentially pushing our partner Taiwan towards Beijing?
So I've seen the press reports. I can't confirm the accuracy of those reports one way or another. Obviously, no surprise to us that Huawei will be looking to find ways to continue illicit production of semiconductors, and particularly working throughout the PRC to do that. I can't confirm the specific reports about Taiwan. And then on export controls, again, no announcements or anything to make today, but we're confident in the export controls that we have in place that they will be helpful in terms of protecting the supply chain for semiconductors here in the United States, and that look, we're not, it's not static. We're going to constantly look at the regime, and if it needs to be changed or adjusted, we'll absolutely do that in the future. The president has been firm, but you've seen it in the CHIPS Act, that he wants the supply chain to start here, not end here, and it's got to be more resilient, and we're going to stay committed to being flexible in the tools we have to do that.
By October 17, 2023, the U.S. suddenly upgraded and updated its chip restrictions. The series of export restriction updates by Washington is aimed at preventing Beijing from getting access to cutting-edge chips needed to develop artificial intelligence technologies, such as large-scale language models, which power applications such as ChatGPT. The U.S. and its allies argue that these technologies also have military applications and pose a threat to national security. Relevant officials and policymakers are increasingly viewing AI through the lens of national security.
Get this wrong, and AI could make it easier to build chemical or biological weapons. Terrorist groups could use AI to spread fear and destruction on an even greater scale. Criminals could exploit AI for cyber attacks, disinformation, fraud, or even child sexual abuse. And in the most unlikely but extreme cases, there is even the risk that humanity could lose control of AI completely, through the kind of AI sometimes referred to as superintelligence.
Home is jobs.
U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo stated that the new measures closed loopholes in the regulations released in October 2022 and would probably be updated at least annually. She said, "The goal is to limit China's access to advanced semiconductors that could fuel breakthroughs in artificial intelligence and sophisticated computers that are critical to Chinese military applications." She stressed that the administration wasn't seeking to hurt Beijing economically. The main measures of this export control upgrade includes the following. First, in 2022, to circumvent the chip ban, NVIDIA made special A800 and H800 chips for the Chinese market, downgrading communication speeds but retaining computing power. This new regulation puts a restriction on computing power, which will result in NVIDIA's A800 and H800 chips and a top-of-the-line gaming chip being discontinued in the Chinese market. Second, also affected and banned for sale in China are Intel's Gaudi 2 specialty AI chips, among others. Intel said in the past that it produced a specific version of the chip to comply with last year's U.S. export rules. Third, the new rules impose limits on how much computing power a chip packs into a certain size, preventing Chinese companies from stacking them into large, non-compliant chips through chiplet technology. The authorities believe that chiplet technology can break through the limitations of the advanced U.S. manufacturing process and achieve the CCP's goal of overtaking competitors around the corners. Fourth, any chip containing 50 billion or more transistors and using high bandwidth memory would face a red flag, and exporters would have to consider whether they need to apply for a license when deciding whether to ship goods to China. The threshold would cover almost all advanced AI chips. Fifth, separately, two leading Chinese chip startups, Biren and More Threads, have been placed on the U.S. trade blacklist. Both companies were co-founded by former Chinese employees of NVIDIA. They are considered to be the leading candidates in China to produce domestic alternatives to NVIDIA's chips, with the goal of competing with U.S. AI chip makers. Vendors will face intense scrutiny before selling to these companies. Finally, the regulations also expanded licensing requirements for the export of advanced chips to more than 40 other countries that are at risk of transferring chips to China and are subject to a U.S. weapons embargo. The Biden administration also hit 21 countries outside China with a licensing requirement for chip-making tools over fears the equipment could be diverted to China and other national security concerns. However, this new regulation upgrade, which mainly targets China's high-performance computing sector such as artificial intelligence, exempts most consumer chips used in laptops, smartphones, and games. This time, NVIDIA is allowed to continue to occupy the middle and lower end of the Chinese market. From this point of view, the U.S. siege on the CCP and semiconductors gradually becomes complete. It can block the CCP's ability to gain access to autonomous higher-order arithmetic and stop its AI development, especially military AI. For the two sanctioned Chinese chip startups, the future will be tough. This is because the two companies may not have access to chips made by TSMC or other leading chip makers that use U.S. equipment. Unlike Huawei, which has vast resources in China, once access to advanced processes is blocked, the two startups will have their pace of technology development effectively slowing down. And since China's chip development already has a significant generation gap with the rest of the world, this new rule will undoubtedly contribute to distancing the CCP from the world's technology. In response to the restrictions, China protested.
China has repeatedly made clear its position on U.S. chip export controls targeting China. We think that the U.S. should stop politicizing, instrumentalizing, and weaponizing economic, trade, and sci-tech issues, and stop disrupting the stability of the global industrial chains and supply chains. China will pay close attention to relevant developments and resolutely safeguard its own rights and interests.
In addition to verbal protests and in a suspected retaliation to the new U.S. restrictions, China's Ministry of Commerce, in conjunction with the General Administration of Customs, announced on October 20th that some graphite products cannot be exported without a license in order to safeguard national security. China is the world's largest producer and exporter of graphite. The announcement by the Ministry of Commerce said that high-purity, high-strength, high-density man-made graphite materials and their products, as well as natural flake graphite and its products, would be formally included in the export control list. The ban will officially start on December 1st, 2023. According to Chinese customs data, the biggest buyers of graphite from China include Japan, the US, India, and South Korea. China's Ministry of Commerce claimed that the move was made to safeguard national security and interests. It's unclear how much of an impact the export restrictions on graphite will have in the short term. But China, like the US, probably won't cut off supplies completely. We believe that one reason why the CCP is doing this is because it's taking a beating in the US-China tech war and has to do something in the face of rising nationalist sentiments domestically. Another reason is that before Xi goes to APEC in November for talks with Biden, Xi feels that perhaps this move will increase his leverage. After all, these measures may have a short-term disruption to the world's graphite supply chain. Such bets are, of course, double-edged swords, and the US-China relationship could become even more strained. On October 24th, a regulatory filing revealed the federal government told NVIDIA that the restrictions on some of its AI chips exported to China would go into effect immediately. a month sooner than the company expected. NVIDIA said that given the strong global demand for chips, it didn't expect any significant short-term impact on the company's financial performance from the ban coming into effect early. The company didn't say why the US government was speeding up the process. China's Taixin website believes that this means that the opportunity for buyers to rush to grab goods before the ban takes effect has been completely blocked. Following the release of new US chip export rules, various players in China began snapping up shipments, with prices for NVIDIA's high-performance computing chips scurrying up. An insider at a major Chinese networking firm said the price quoted for a single H800 card has risen from 210,000 yuan to between 350 and 400,000 yuan, or US 55,000, up from US 28,000. The banning of H800 and A800 GPUs, which are currently in the strongest demand in mainland China, will have a greater impact. Large model training, for example, which relies heavily on arithmetic power, and scientific computing, which involves GPU calculations, will also be affected. Some smart computing centers that are under construction may face difficulties in not being able to procure the necessary chips. CCP leader Xi Jinping has long made clear to the outside world his view that gaining control of the semiconductor sector is key to the CCP's ability to overtake the US and become a global technological superpower. But Xi's ambitious plan to produce 70% of its own chips by 2025 now looks like a distant dream. A number of analysts believe that the gap between China's chip industry and the West is about 2 to 3 generations. Even if China now really has 7nm production capacity, the West has entered the 3nm era since 2022. Samsung and TSMC have begun mass production of 3nm chips. 7nm is about the capacity of TSMC in 2018. So China is at least 5 years behind the West. If you look at advanced processes, China is about 3 to 4 generations behind the world's leading processes like TSMC. It takes about 2 to 3 years for a generation to go from development to commercialization, so China is probably a decade behind at least. The purpose of the US ban is to delay the CCP's progress in advanced technology. We predict that there might be even tighter restrictions in the future. This is because the US and its allies know that China is the second largest economy in the world. And if they don't do everything they can to stop the CCP right now, they probably won't be able to do anything about it in the next few years.
China is, unquestionably the world's second AI power behind the US. That's just a fact when you look at the amount of research, investment, and activity that's happening there. And AI doesn't respect borders.
So far, the chip ban by the US and its allies has dealt a huge blow to China's related industries. In January 2023, news broke that China's largest memory chip maker Yangtze Memory Technology, YMTC, would lay off as much as 10% of its workforce company-wide. At the time, the company had about 6,000 employees. Prior to the introduction of US export controls, YMTC's global market share of flash memory chips was poised to double to 10% by 2027. But the introduction of the export controls has put an end to that prospect. YMTC is just one of the more than 24 Chinese artificial intelligence chip makers that were placed on the US export control blacklist in December 2022. In addition to YMTC, a number of other firms are in trouble as a result. Over the past 4 months, at least 2 Chinese handset chip makers have collapsed, including one owned by Oppo, the world's 4th largest Chinese handset brand in terms of sales. To stay afloat, the once stellar Chinese firms have laid off employees and cut bonuses. In the first 7 months of 2023, China's chip imports plunged 17%. The struggles of China's tech sector have forced the authorities to revive a state fund. In late February 2023, about 1.9 billion was injected into YMTC through the fund. The state fund was halted last year after it was implicated in an anti-corruption investigation. Our channel covered this dramatic event. Here's a snippet of the coverage. This photo has recently become an internet sensation in China because the 6 people depicted are the top players in China's chip industry, and now they are all in big trouble. On their backdrop it says, "Change the world with dreams." The reality is that it's the dream of getting rich that has changed their destiny. There was an unprecedented storm that occurred in China's chip industry at the end of July 2022. In the past few days, several senior executives of the organization behind the semiconductor industry in mainland China have been taken away by the CCP's Central Commission for Discipline, Inspection, and Investigation. Top executives at Tsinghua Unigroup, a chip giant with close ties to the organization, also fell. This storm suggests that Xi Jinping, the current CCP leader, can no longer endure the corruption permeating the industry and is trying to launch an anti-corruption campaign against influential figures to save China's chip industry. According to Chu's data, in the first half of this year in China, 144 listed semiconductor companies saw their performance plummet in the first half of the year, with 42 of them posting losses, including many well-known semiconductor giants such as Cambrian Technology. So it's clear why the CCP is so mad at the US. The US chip export controls, coupled with tariffs and other measures, are having a crushing effect on China's economy.